backstory that tells us why they turned bad. Like if you look at the story, we used to know who we were supposed to root against, but now we feel kind of bad about it because if you look at the backstories of people like Elphaba, like in The Wizard of Oz, we used to think that the Wicked Witch of the East, right, was a really bad person who wanted to kill people and maim them and stuff. But now we just realize it's Elphaba. And she was actually mistreated by the wizard and some other people. Maleficent, I just heard her backstory. All right, she has a horrible backstory where everybody in her life just mistreated her and caged her. And the Grinch, I used to dislike the Grinch, but did you know that the people down there in Whoville rejected him first? Did you know that? And then, the last one, Magneto, total bad guy in the Marvel Universe. He actually is a survivor of the Holocaust in the Marvel backstory on the movies, and that's why he distrusts humanity. So I'm looking at all that, and I'm thinking, I watch those movies, and I think, maybe they aren't so bad after all. And then I think, wait, what? No, these are awful, awful people who do awful, awful things. So welcome to week 3 of Intentionals. I'm Lance. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're taking a look at the minor prophets. I've been saying that the minor prophets are those prophets who, when they get carded at the bar, say, I left my ID in the car, and then they never come back. That's a very funny joke. Thank you. I appreciate that. Every prophet in the Old Testament is actually a preview of the promise fulfilled in Jesus. I know we don't, when we're reading through the Old Testament, we get to the minor prophets, some of us don't even get there, and we don't read them because they don't seem to be connected to where we live. But they are. I mean, please read them. There's 12 minor prophets at the end of the Old Testament. Read them. There are 12 books that we really don't spend a lot of time on, but we're intentionally focusing on them for the next 10 weeks of the summer. We're skipping a couple of them. But I want you to read through them. This one in particular, even if you haven't read it yet, read Amos. I think we've agreed, all of us, unfortunately, on this idea. If I can somehow explain the horrible things that I do, then they're not so bad. If I can somehow point out the why behind the things that I've done, if I can explain the horrible things I do, it makes the horrible things not so horrible. Well, that's a horrible way of thinking about life. If we agree together, if we all decide as a culture, hey, there are justifiable reasons for being an awful human being, then everyone is going to find their own justification. If you're looking for an exit ramp of morality, then you're going to take the first one you find. You're going to figure out a reason why you're so awful. I was mistreated as a child. The man kept me down. Dad never said he loved me. The danger to that way of thinking is that we can get really good at finding reasons why we are the way we are. Did you know that why you are the way you are is not the main issue in your life? I know we're so obsessed with it right now. It may help you understand it, and that's a good thing. Finding out why you are the way you are does nothing to help you change. Here's something that might hurt. As much as we hate to hear it, others in this world have faced what you've faced and worse, and didn't use it as an excuse for what they became. Ouch. We don't want our lives to be one long explanation of how we turned out the way we did. Instead, what we want is it to be an amazing story of how we faced struggles, we faced rejection, we faced hurt, and we overcame it. And the first part of that, by the way, is going to hurt. And it hurts everybody. Nobody's going to get out of this thing unscathed. We can't ignore reality forever. And we have to wake up. And that's where the prophets of the Old Testament come in, okay? They are the ones who point out evil. And they don't ask the backstory because everybody's got one. They point out the injustices. They point out the unfaithfulness. And it's fun for no one. In this case, especially Amos, who is writing the book that we're reading right now. So Amos is a Old Testament prophet, and his name actually means burden, like a weight. If you've ever felt that in your life, like, man, I've just got this weight on me. He was from this village of Tekoa in Judah. The Bible says in Amos 1:1 that he was a sheep herder, but he wasn't just a sheep herder. He was more of a manager, a business owner. He managed sheep herders. Not far, by the way, Tekoa was not far from Bethlehem. It's conceivable that people who worked for and worked with Amos actually were some of the ones who got to see the angels in the sky over Bethlehem a long time later. So that's kind of cool. He was also a dresser of sycamore trees, and sycamore is kind of a weird word, okay? This is actually a fruit that grew in that area that got ripened quicker if you kind of poked a hole in the fruit so that it would ripen quicker, and it was really sweet fruit, and that's what he did. He was a guy who probably traveled to do that because it wasn't really growing in the area that he lived. So maybe he irrigated his own land or he traveled. Anyway, this guy was a business owner. Smart, not dumb. Don't read Country Bumpkin, okay? This guy actually wrote Amos in the most beautiful Hebrew in the Old Testament. So this guy knew what he was doing, okay? But he wasn't a prophet. He was just a normal guy doing life. And then God came to him and said, I've got a message that I want you to deliver to Israel. This is weird because Amos lived in Judah. Here's something that is just, it blows my mind. And it's not going to be quite as cool for you as it's going to be cool for the crowd on Sunday. When we date the book of Amos, we can actually date it very specifically. Now, some people disagree on this, but this is too cool for me not to say. Because he says that he was given this prophecy 2 years before the earthquake, and then there was an eclipse, and then he names the actual kings that were there, we know the date of the earthquake because it was widely reported all over the Middle East. So this particular book, out of all the books in the Old Testament, we date to June 15th, 760 BC. Now that's cool for us, but it's going to be super cool on Sunday when it's actually June 15th, right? So we know that this was it was an 8th century prophet. Here's the map of the region. We've told you guys that this was a divided kingdom, right? You've got Judah in the south and Israel in the north. There's Damascus up there. But anyway, right in between there of the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, there's Israel right there in the middle. This is a nation, by the way, Hosea and Amos, I preached on Hosea a couple of weeks ago. Amos was first, but they were basically contemporaries. They were writing and preaching about the same time. 8th century, 760 for this guy. This nation that he was preaching to, Israel, prosperous. Everything was going great. Everybody got, a nice house. They were politically powerful. In fact, it was so good because Egypt was staying to themselves, and Assyria, a really powerful country, had kind of spent all their cash and their money and their war efforts on defeating Syria, so they were kind of taking a breather. Israel used that time to expand. They were doing well with trade, relationships. They were wealthy. They were making it, And you know what they mistook that for? God must like us. He must like us a little bit better than he likes the other people. So they were comfortable. They were comfy. And this is the nation. They had a lot of spirituality too. They were doing well. It's important for us to realize that Israel thought they were doing it right, and their evidence was what? Their easy life and their absence of punishment. But in the beginning of the book of Amos, Amos says, and then the lion roars. And who's the lion? The lion is God himself, and it's a wake-up call. If you're sleeping in a tent and you hear a lion roar, it's wake-up time, right? You don't just, I think I'm going to hit the snooze on this. It's wake-up time. And Amos is saying, wake up. You think everything's going great. You're comfortable. You got everything you need. So chapter 1 it starts out sounding really cool. Because here's what Amos does. He travels up to the capital city of Israel, the northern kingdom, and he starts preaching. And everybody loves what he's saying because he starts out by talking about all of their neighbors, and they hate all of their neighbors. If you come up to me and you start talking about the Philadelphia Eagles in a bad way, I'm going to listen up, right? Because I don't like them, right? So he's talking about all of their neighbors, and he starts out with Damascus. And then he show that map one more time. He starts out with Damascus. He goes down to Ammon, then Moab, and then Edom, and then Gaza, and then up to Tyre. What they don't really, and he's doing this on purpose, by the way. Think about what he's doing. Picture it as a spiral. He's drawing this spiral, and it's getting closer and closer. And finally, he goes to Judah, and they don't really even like Judah that much because it's a divided kingdom. And he finishes up, and every one of these, by the way, he says, Damascus, 3 sins I won't forget. No, 4 I won't forgive. He goes 3 and 4 and 3 and 4. It basically means they're sinning again and again and again. And everybody in Israel is going, yeah, they're loving this, talking about the sins of these other nations. And then, finally, he gets to Israel. He's zeroed in on Israel. And they didn't even see it coming. They were having a good time. It's so easy for us to look around and hope the people around us get what they deserve. You ever been hurt, really wounded by somebody, and then you see them fail in public too? Or you hear something bad about them, and you have that, and you don't like to admit it, that secret joy. You know, maybe something went wrong for them, their business failed, whatever it is. It's so easy to think that those people deserve what they get, but we don't. We do this all the time. I mean, if I ever accidentally pull out in front of somebody in traffic, I've got a good reason. It's not because I'm dumb, right? Or I'm not looking around. It's because either I was late or, somebody was distracting me. But if somebody pulls out in front of me, why do they do it? Well, it's because they're an idiot. That's why. They call this the fundamental attribution error. It's something we do all the time. In other words, when I do something wrong, it's not because it's who I am. It's because of outside circumstances. But when you do something wrong, it's not because of what's happening to you. It's because you're that way. And that's the way Israel was. They were looking at everybody and they were going, they're that way. Thank God we're not. So easy for us to do that. They do it because they're bad. I do it because of reasons. I got them. So there's this spiral and it's closing in. There's these accusations against all their neighbors and there's these judgments. But then the worst accusation of all, and it's this. Amos from Judah is up there in an unfamiliar territory. By the way, he's been hanging out for a while. He's been to a funeral. He's been to their feast. He's been to their worship services. He's been talking to people. And here's what he discovered. You guys think you're so different. You guys think you're so distinct. You know what I found out? You look just like them. You're exactly the same. And that's why he started with everybody surrounding Israel. You think you're so distinct, so above, so different. You have been pressed into their mold. Is that a cricket? Usually when you're talking and you hear crickets, that's a really bad sign. Like they were so into it. No, man, I heard crickets. And we're not going to be able to stop it. We're actually just going to have to deal with this together. So I need your eyes right now. Can we deal with this? Are we going to be okay? Okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to try to be okay. You have been pressed into their mold, right? You look just kind of, I can't tell you apart is what he's saying. Please post about this. So what is Amos trying to do? Here's what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring a dose of reality to their fantasy world. They think they're so cool, and God is showing up and saying, you're not that cool. You're not that distinct. You look just like them. He's trying to get them to wake up to reality, is what he's doing. Wake up. We can deceive ourselves so fast. They think life is great, but Amos is saying, hey, this is sick. And this is why I believe God gave Amos this job, because his name means burden. This is weighing on him. He's going, how can this be? How can the people of God look exactly like everybody else? So that's what he's saying in Amos 1. In Amos 2, 6 through 16, he gives them pictures of this. He tells them, you sell righteous people for money. You know what they were doing? They were actually capturing people and selling them either into indentured servanthood or slavery as if they were their own property. Some people come to me and they say, the Bible condones slavery. That's completely false, by the way. There are modes that the Bible comes in and regulates slavery, but it never condones it. Says if you're doing this is how you ought to do it, and then undercuts slavery with the New Testament and many of the regulations. It was always completely against the law to go somewhere, capture someone, and sell them. That's called chattel slavery. If you're wondering what that looks like, it looks like what the UK and the US and many other countries did from the 1600s on until sometime in the 1800s. Chattel slavery, capturing and selling. It's always been evil. However, in the Old Testament, some people would sell themselves into slavery if they had enormous debt and they needed to be protected by a family. They would sell themselves, work off that debt, and be freed after 7 years. I don't know if you guys knew that. They were freed in the year of Jubilee. So it was a way for people to find a way out and get out of debt. However, Amos is seeing something completely different. You think you're better than them. You think you own them. You think maybe it's racial, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just territorial. You think because you worship me and they worship some other god that you can just own them. And that was awful, and Amos hated it. They were so bad about being greedy that Amos says, you are greedy of the dust on the heads of the people mourning because they're poor. What they would do is if they were in mourning, they would throw dirt up in the air. He said, you're so greedy for land that you want the dust on the head of the people that don't have anything. That's how awful you are. What a great picture of an awful thing. They have absolutely nothing but lust for more. And what it does is it causes them to see people in their world as resources. It causes them to become users. They take and take and take. There are just some societies that end up looking that way when stuff becomes more important than people. Don't we see this in our own country where not just greed for money, but greed for pleasure and greed for power ends up making people in our lives pawns instead of people. And we start moving them around and using them. And some of you have been maybe even used. Probably, and you hate to hear this, some of us have used people in order to get what we want. And one of the things that happens when a whole nation, turns their back on God is that people who are following God start to look really weird. People who are saying things that are true and true for good, true forever, no matter how many people vote on it, they start to look really weird. They're mocked and they're shamed publicly. Because morality is being changed and twisted. When you actually talk about real morality, then you just look like a weirdo. Because nothing is too far anymore. People can do whatever they want and use people however they want. Then morality is being canceled. And so will you be if you talk about it. Basically, any idea about what to do sexually in our culture is a good one. Immoral practice of taking someone else and practicing, immorality with them, man, we look weird. And I think that's weird. That using people has become something that's so accepted. I think that's weird. When people claim to rewrite morality, and here's what's worse, then they plaster the name of Jesus on it and say, now we're going to call that Christianity. Well, and I think that, why? Why do they do that? Because God called us to love. Yes, absolutely. We're to love everybody. But what Amos is saying is, love doesn't look like approval. Because why did Amos even go up to Israel? Because he hated them? No, he wanted more than anything for them to turn back from what they were doing And he was paying a cost to do it, right? He traveled up there. He gave up his business. He went up there, probably spent a year kind of observing them. He tells them, you made the Nazarites. I don't know if you guys know who the Nazarites are, but Samson was one of them. They had a few things they couldn't do. They couldn't touch grapes because they couldn't drink wine. So they couldn't touch grapes. They couldn't touch anything dead. They were committed to the Lord. He said, you guys up in Israel, you made them drink wine, and then when the prophets came in and said, hey, don't do that, you told the prophets to shut up. You told them to quit talking. You know why people do that in our world? Why do they tell you to shut up? Because you ought to be able to hear anybody, right? Unless you love lies. Because people who love lies, they hate the truth. The truth doesn't feel good. So either shut up or line up. Even better if you can make the lies look like Christianity. So that's why in verse 13, he says, it's like God is weighed down like a cart with too much produce on it. It's like a crushing weight, tottering, wobbling under the weight of what you're putting on. So he makes it really clear. Amos is not a happy book. He's saying, judgment is coming, and it's going to be awful. Destruction is coming. Assyria, you remember I talked about Assyria and how they were taking a breather? Well, in just a few years, about 30 years, they're going to swarm over Israel, and Israel is never going to be heard of again. And here's the thing. Even though Amos is preaching this, you know what he's getting from the nation of Israel? A collective yawn. They're all going, yeah, whatever. Looks like everything's fine right now. Nothing's going on. So he gets a little personal. In chapter 4, verse 1, he says, listen to me, you fat cows. I'm not kidding you. It's in there. Like in the New Living Translation. By the way, he's not body shaming people. He's culture shaming people. Fatness was connected to excess, prosperity. And he's saying, you're so fat and you don't care that people are starving. Listen up, you fat cows living in Samaria. And he talks to the women, you women who oppress the poor and you crush the needy and who are always calling to your husbands, bring us another drink. He's just like going at them. When you read fat cows, just read Real Housewives, right? So just, he's saying there is this group of people who only exist for themselves. The Real Housewives of Samaria. And they're just living their life as if they're the main character. And Amos is saying, you're not. You keep wanting the day of the Lord to come. They would say, oh, wouldn't it be great if the day of the Lord happens? He says, you don't even know what you're asking about. It's going to be awful when God shows up. I've given you chance after chance. I took away everything. If you've ever been a parent and you've been trying to get your kid to change in any area, and you've removed things, you took the phone away, you took the video games away, and no change. Over and over again, God is saying, I did this, I did this, I did this. And then he says, yet you did not return to me. Amos has this long history of God trying to work with Israel, and Israel saying, nah, everything's going great. We're kind of fine. They go about with their showy religion. They keep on doing their stuff. And God finally in chapter 5 says this. He says, I hate all your show and your pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and your solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and your grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of righteous living. God is ethical and moral. We don't just intellectualize God and experience God. We live it. Look, learning about God is great. Actually experiencing God in a worship service or a mission trip is great. But guys, it's nothing if we don't live it. This community does not care how much you know about God. This community does not care how much you've experienced God. If it doesn't matter in how you treat people, you are not representing God. And that's who Amos was talking to. People who felt like God totally approves because they felt it and they know about God. And he's saying, no, wake up to reality. Are you at ease? Are you secure? Are you comfy? In verse 8, he says, in chapter 6, I hate the arrogance of Israel. You guys think you're the VIPs. You're not the VIP. I'm the VIP. You're my honored guest, and I'm getting sick of hanging out with you. I don't want to hang out with you anymore. You're embarrassing me. You're desperate for a lot of stuff. Don't put my name on that. Wake up to your greed. Wake up to your lust. Wake up to the injustice. Wake up to reality. God gave Amos 5 visions. One of them was locusts. And it was like a swarm of locusts just taking over Israel. And Amos prays. He says, God, don't do that. We're small. How could we ever recover? And the Bible says, and God didn't do it. Next vision was fire. And fire burned up all the crops. And Amos prays and he says, God, don't do that. We're small. We would never recover from that. And God doesn't do it. But then the next vision, Amos can't pray against. It's the plumb line. I don't know if you guys know what a plumb line is, but it's a string with a weight, and it always hangs straight because gravity pulls down on it. And you can hold it up to a wall, and you can figure out, is that wall straight or is it crooked? And in the vision that Amos had, the plumb line is held up to a wall that's so crooked that it's irreparable. You just have to destroy it. And it woke Amos up. I'm not going to pray against that anymore. I can see Israel is too far gone. The next vision was summer fruit, meaning, and summer fruit is kind of a way of saying, basically in the Hebrew, this summer fruit had a strong similarity to the word ending. It's like it's been going on too long. You're overripe. Justice has been I've been waiting too long. And Amos was waking up to this, and the next vision was just the Lord standing beside the altar. It's the end. I'm coming to judge. And then at the very end of Amos, after all of this, this is tough. At the very end, we get something called hope. Because like I said at the beginning, every prophecy points to the fulfilled promise of Jesus. And this hope is not about what Israel's going to do. If you look at Amos 9, 11 through 15, it's not about what Israel's going to do. No, it's about what God's going to do. I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to love you. Because the coming day of the Lord doesn't end in judgment. It begins with judgment, but it ends in me restoring everything. The weight that pulls down the plumb line, the weight that condemns us and makes our knees buckle, the weight that Amos was bearing was going to be borne by Jesus himself on the cross. That weight was taken care of. We don't face judgment as believers. We're under a new covenant, and he's saying, I will gather you back together. There's a light. I love you. I'll be with you. I'll bring you back. I forgive you. Have faith in me. We know that this relates to us because in the book of Acts, James, one of the half-brothers of Jesus, actually quotes Amos. Amos 9, 11 through 15, James in the book of Acts, when he's talking about whether us Gentiles can get in, here's what he says. He says, afterward, he's quoting Amos here, afterward I will return and restore the fallen house of David. He's talking about Jesus being king. I will rebuild its ruins and restore it so that the rest of humanity, that's us, might seek the Lord, including the Gentiles. All those I have called to be mine. The Lord has spoken, he who made these things known so long ago. He's quoting someone who wrote around 790 years before James spoke it. Wake up to reality. Well, what's reality? Well, Colossians 2:17 says reality is Jesus. Wake up to Jesus. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality. So wake up to that. A couple of things I think we want to do. Number one, I think as believers we ought to stand out. Not with your radio station presets or your t-shirts or a picture of you and a Bible at the coffee shop, but instead how you treat the barista at the coffee shop. Stand out the way that God would if God walked among us. And he did. Jesus walked among us. And a couple of ways to stand out that I'm going to give you. Bless. Learn how to bless people in your circle, people on the front row of your life. What does blessing look like? Well, I think it looks like this. Find ways to surprise people around you with a glimpse of what it is to live in the world where Jesus is king, where people aren't selfish, where people aren't trying to use people, but instead love them. Surprise people with what it looks like to live in the kingdom. Bless. It's a lot of fun to do that, by the way. And then one of our things about being a barrier breaker is eat with other people. Take somebody out to lunch and pay for it. So maybe somebody outside the church or outside the faith. On June 29th, we're going to be doing a reality everywhere, which is, that's a Sunday, and we're asking everybody to just invite people over. We're going to be not shut down as a church. You can't shut down church, all right? But this building is going to be vacated, and you guys are going to be the church everywhere in our community, inviting people over, letting them, surprising them with what it looks like to be in the kingdom of God. One other thing you could do is be baptized. Now, I know you guys have a lot of backstory and a lot of reasons why you haven't done it yet, but the water's warm. If you want to be baptized tonight, I'll stay afterwards and baptize you tonight, talk to you about the gospel. And then speak up. There's something really costly in our world about telling the truth, isn't there? And I'm not saying don't grab a megaphone and go out to the College World Series and shout at people that they're going to hell. But across a table, in a conversation, say the things that need to be said and don't be scared. Say them with love. I mean, here's what Walter Brueggemann said. Walter was born in Nebraska. He just died a few days ago. Incredible theologian. He says, like the ancient prophets, we're dispatched back to the good work entrusted to us. So just like Amos, it is the work of peacemaking. It's the work of truth-telling. It's the work of justice-doing. It's the good work, but it requires our resolve to stay it, even in the face of the forces to the contrary that are sure to prevail for a season. Isn't that true? I mean, we don't speak out to win the day or to win the argument. We speak out so that truth has a voice for the moment. And learning how to speak the truth in love, I think it requires hanging out with Jesus a lot. You're not going to be able to just do this. In fact, if you don't hang out with Jesus a lot, please don't speak the truth, because you're probably going to do it wrong. And that's not what the world needs. Somebody just speaking truth, like the little brother of the world. I'm telling, you're doing it wrong. Nobody likes that. But hang out with Jesus and you'll learn a new way to talk. So, wonder if you guys have any questions. I spoke a little bit longer because of the crickets. That's what I'm blaming. Yes? Do you mean the sayings of Amos? Because they were written down. He did. He read it. He had studied it. He was brought up on the minor prophets, although they weren't a part of like the first 5 books, but they had what they called the law, the prophets, and the writings. The writings would be like Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Psalms, kind of poetic stuff. They had the law and the prophets, which were the major prophets, Isaiah, some of those guys, and then the 12, I think there were 4 minor and 12 major minor prophets. So they did have these writings. So James was brought up reading them, but I don't think he ever thought that it was about Jesus until Jesus was resurrected. Remember, James thought that Jesus was crazy. He thought his older brother was nuts. And he said that, and his family said that. So, I mean, you imagine how you would behave if all of a sudden when your sibling said, and by the way, I'm God. They would take a lot to prove to you that they were. And I think it would have to include the resurrection. I think James is one of the main reasons actually to believe in Jesus. His sibling saw him resurrected and then became a part of the church and gave his life for it. I think tradition says that James was beheaded and never recanted. So that's pretty amazing to me. Any other questions? Because I answered that one so long, nobody else has. I didn't know. We're in here for another 5 minutes if I ask a question. Okay, so here's the thing. I know this is kind of tough, but I think it's good sometimes to just drop the excuses. I know you've got a backstory. I've got a backstory. God's not, you know what? This might blow your mind. God knows your backstory. And it's not that he doesn't care. It's just that he's not going to judge you based on the reasons how you got here. The fact is you're here. You've got all of that. But what if Jesus can redeem that? And you can grow and you can change. I think step one is figuring out where you're at. Wake up to reality. Reality is you and Jesus looking at your life, not looking for excuses, but instead looking for the brokenness that Jesus can heal and really change. You don't have to be the same person that you are right now. You don't have to be that story. That story doesn't own you. Jesus owns you if you believe in him. That's freeing. This community needs people who've been set free. Free to love outsiders, free to love the poor, free to love people with special needs, those people who've been forgotten. This world needs people who look to sacrifice. This world needs people who look to lose instead of win. Nothing stands out like someone who doesn't need to win. This isn't a call, by the way, to not succeed. It's actually a call to succeed at the things that God cares about. Let's do that. I'm going to pray for you. Let's pray. Father, we come before you and we just submit our lives to you. We ask you, in light of the fact that you know us better than we know ourselves, help us to lay our lives at the altar and embrace the change that only Jesus brings. He bore the weight of our sin.